There we are. Looking good.
Okay, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started then. Brandon, do you want to start us off with the COVID disclaimer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I want to provide a few reminders to ensure that the COVID-19 provisions of the Kansas Open Meeting Act are met. Board members and other meeting participants must state their names and titles each time they speak. Various members of city staff are present via Zoom and in person in attendance, and we must also state our names and our titles each time we speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as a count of the vote. The agenda for the meeting provided instructions for how to submit public comment and how it would be handled in the meeting. Written public comment should have been received prior to the meeting, and we did receive some written public comment, and that is attached to the agenda this evening. And I believe that we have at least one member of the public who is interested in providing comment throughout the evening. Finally, the chair will call for in-person public comment as well for those without access to technology options. And Madam Chair, I can report that we have no people in audience in attendance this evening. Before we do though, I have one request.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And then we can make
this welcome everyone.
After you convene
good
the meeting.
Evening, good cold evening. I think we'll go ahead and start with action item number one, and that would be for the January 14th, 2021 minutes. Is there a motion? Jane?
Gibson, board member, I move that we approve the minutes. They're more detailed than the last round.
Yes.
Commissioner board member, seconded.
Hey, Chair Salvini, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion. If not, we're ready for a vote.
Madam Chair.
All those in, yes.
I apologize. We had some technical difficulties on our end. I don't know if anybody else heard that, but we were unable to hear what the board was just discussing. Would you mind just summarizing that for me real quick, what we missed out on?
Sure. Absolutely. This is Chair Salvini. Board Member Gibson moved that we accept the minutes and commented on the comprehensive nature in which they were prepared. And Board Member Mishra seconded. And we're getting ready to vote as there was no discussion.
Thank you. My apologies.
No problem. We're getting ready for the vote then. Board Member Gibson, yay or nay?
Yay, board member Gibson.
Board Member Graybill?
Board Graybill,
So,
Graybill.
good evening, everyone.
Yay.
Glad we... Board Member Littleton?
Yes, Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Mishra?
Board member Mishra, yeah.
Board Member Robinson?
Board Member Robinson, yay.
Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Murray Taylor, yay.
And Chair Salvini, yay. So the motion passes 7 yays for the passage of the minutes from the last meeting. Okay, we're ready to move on to then Section B, public comment, and that would be number 1 on the public comment, as we don't have anyone in the audience. Stephanie, I'd like to turn this over to you at this time.
Very well, this is...
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. We did have one other very brief report under the minutes heading. And I saw Board Member Gibson raise her hand. Jane, was that what you were going to mention as well? Okay.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So I would suggest, just before we move on to public general public comment. I can just give the board a very quick update on the conversation about the formatting of the minutes from the last meeting.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Brandon.
Okay, excellent. As the board members may recall, at the previous meeting, there was some discussion about the formatting of the minutes and some question about whether or not it could be enhanced, either more detail in the minutes or some bookmarking in the video to help quickly reference discussion in the recording of the meeting with the agenda items. And so I guess I just have to apologize and also offer thanks for pointing out that we had actually failed to turn that function on or that feature on in our iCompass system for these particular agendas. And so what we did, myself and Bobby Walthall from the city manager's office, we went back and realized that the time stamping feature had not been activated, and so we were able to pretty simply just switch that on. And so if you'll bear with me for just a minute, I will walk you through how to make use of that feature. And I hope that you'll find at least that it provides a little bit more of an enhanced experience when trying to go back and study up on previous meetings. Let's see. Okay, are you seeing the December 10th agenda on your screen now?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent, okay. So I'll use the December 10th meeting, and of course all of these agendas and minutes are available on the board's webpage through the City of Lawrence KS.org site. So the December 10th meeting, we have our agenda, we have video, we have minutes, and then we have an HTML version. The minutes themselves are still a static version, but what you'll find is that to reference items at certain points in the video, you can click on the video option, and that takes you to the split screen where we have the video and then we have the agenda and the reports. And in this screen, you can very quickly go to the point of the video, or you should be able to, go to the point of the video where that part of the discussion occurs. You should be able to, being the key word. And so apparently it's not working with this one either. So I apologize for that, but I wanted to show you this functionality because this is what we do with our other board packets, such as the city commission packet, and it ends up working pretty well. Well, but it's apparently still not turned on. Oh, there we go, there we are. Sorry about that. So to go to those sections in the video,
Which is to approve the minutes.
you simply click on the video
Three sets of
link.
minutes to approve. To part B, the public comment.
21 meeting dates, Tanya?
And
Okay, and so that's how the functionality works. Sorry, and I'll try to back into it one more time. And so if, for example, you're on this November 12th meeting, you'll go to minutes, and then if we hit split screen, then that's what takes us to the video timestamps. And so I just wanted to offer that to the board and make sure that would be satisfactory to be able to navigate the videos and get very quickly to the points in the video recording that correspond with each agenda item.
Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. I think that's great, Brandon. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and sorry about the confusion with the presentation.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Brandon. That's okay. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, let's Any other comments or questions on that? And again, thanks, Brandon. So let's move back to the agenda. And excuse me. We're on section B, public comments, item 1, and I was turning it over to Stephanie.
All right, thanks, Tanya. This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I'm going to read the public comment segment here, and then we can move forward and ask for this comment. The public is allowed to speak at public comment after first being recognized by the chair, except that any complaints or comments regarding individually identifiable officers are not allowed. Rather, any such comments or complaints may be provided to the board in writing, and the board will forward such comment or complaint to the appropriate person within the Lawrence Police Department. The board may establish reasonable limitations on the allowable length of public comment. As a general practice, the board will not discuss or debate these items, nor will it make decisions on items presented during this time. In addition, I would add, the public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled for discussion on today's agenda. Individuals wishing to provide live public comment must register as outlined at the top of the agenda, and public comment is limited to 3 minutes. With that, I understand Stephen Watts would like to speak. And if he is present, is he present, Brandon?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Mr. Watts has not joined the Zoom meeting tonight.
I didn't think so.
Not at this point.
Okay.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Okay, I don't believe so at this time. And Tanya, we can move on to the next item.
Okay, this is Chair Salvini. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate that. We'll move on to section C, the agenda items. And number 1, discussion with District Attorney Suzanne Valdez. And we appreciate, and I hope I didn't butcher your name there. We are so glad to have you with us, District Attorney. And we're glad to hear from you this evening and certainly engage with you in some wonderful discourse. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I want to recognize a couple people that I know from my University of Kansas days, Sanjay Mishra and Marie Taylor. I worked with both of these two individuals in lots of capacities, and so it's great to see some familiar faces here. And I'm happy to talk to you. I understand that I have a few things to say, a few remarks. There's been some questions that have been asked of me, which I've am prepared to try to answer, I guess. And certainly talk to you as long as you want me to be here to talk to you. And if you need me to come back, I'm happy to do that. One of my goals from the very beginning is to communicate with anybody and everybody about criminal justice reform and sort of what the DA's office is trying to accomplish in terms of keeping our community safe. So you'll also see Josh Seiden on the screen. Josh Seiden is the Deputy District Attorney in our office, and he joined me a month ago. So we've been in office for a month, and so far so good. I don't think we've screwed anything up yet, but Josh is wonderful in the sense that he comes from, in many, many ways, but importantly, he comes from a defense background. He's a very respected defense attorney, former defense attorney in the area, and he has been and will be very critical to the policies and procedures that we are working on in our office. And I give a huge shout out to him because since August, when the primary election happened, he basically closed his office as a defense attorney, worked for free for 4 months until he was put on the payroll. He's been tireless. He's been focused on really just sort of the big goals, if you will, of our office and trying to create written policies that are clear and concise, that keep our communities safe, but look at equity in many, many forms. Before I get started, I thought I would also give a shout out to interim Sheriff Brixius. He was probably one of the, I would say, the very few people initially who congratulated me on the election in August. And since then, he has been very welcoming. He has been very, very helpful to me in the transition to the DA's office in January. I've met with him many, many times. He's always taken a call from me. He's always available. I will say the same about his chain of command, his captains and his lieutenants. I know he went through a restructure. And I can honestly say that if it weren't, we have to wear masks when we see each other, but I've gotten to know a lot of not only his command staff, but his rank and file officers. And I will tell you that they have been wonderful. And I won't speak for him, I'll speak for me, but I think we've got, we all agree on a central goal, which is keeping our community safe, doing it fair, doing it equitably, figuring out ways where we can keep the community safe, keep people in their homes with their family, and just coming up and being open to new ideas about how we can do that here in Lawrence. So I am very excited. It really, when I started in January, it really was pretty seamless because I felt like I knew law enforcement in that space. It's really important for me to address. I'm addressing it because this is the police review board, but I received the same treatment from, of course, the Sheriff's Department, Eudora Police, Baldwin Police, Kansas, University of Kansas Police, and everyone, the law enforcement agencies that are working here in Douglas County. So we are all considered law enforcement. So we've got law enforcement as the policing piece of it, investigation piece of it, but then the prosecution. If we think about prosecution and bringing people to justice, we're all under law considered law enforcement. So it's very important that we work together. It's very important that we collaborate together. It's very important that we have shared goals. And I really believe that we have that here in Douglas County, and we're going to continue, I think, to work together. I also think it's really important to stress that law enforcement in its true sense does the investigation, they police, right? They keep our community safe, boots to the ground. Prosecutors will prosecute crimes. And we will, of course, under our new policies, try to figure out whether we can do alternatives to incarceration. But it's really important that we stay in our respective lanes. It's also very important that we communicate with each other and do so in a way that makes sense for our community. So I thought that what I would do real quickly is I've spent a lot of time thinking about what you all are doing and your goals. And I can only sort of get, I guess, from my own perspective as not only district attorney, but as a public citizen, right? And someone who is thinking about policing and what can we do to restart and recharge the criminal justice system. I think back to, what happened this summer with George Floyd and all of the horrible, racial inequities that we've seen in terms of law enforcement and how some of our citizens have been treated. And it was horrific. Certainly, it's made an impact and had an impact on my life, on all of our lives. And I think, we think about, is there an opportunity now, especially with what I think is a very important national, desire, if you will, and community desire to really think about, can we do things better? Can we make things better? So I certainly understand that and the need to really try to make some sort of difference. So I thought I would talk about sort of four things as I've put together just the questions that were sent to me. And I know Stephanie Littleton was really helpful in sending me the ordinances that have existed, the proposed ordinance. I've done a little my own research, being a former law professor. I've just had some good, I've really sort of tried to dig into it, but thought I'd sort of distill it into four different pieces, or if you will, my insight on four parts here that I think I can give insight in and about as DA. And I will have Josh jump in too, because he knows more about some of this, more in the weeds, if you will, because that's really sort of his space here in the office. So 4 areas. 1, racial profiling, what can be done about that? The second, and what can we do as the DA's office to help with that and try to fix it, right? Because that's a big question and certainly a big concern. Second is use of excessive force with policing. Of course, what happens if you have a police shooting? What is it that we do in the DA's office? 3, Brady Giglio policies, which are really, I'll get into the little bit of the weeds on that, but I'm going to have Josh really sort of chime in on that. But it's really looking at bias by police, bias by any witness actually who testifies in a case that we're bringing before a jury, and what is it that the state has to disclose? What is it that prosecutors have to disclose? So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I thought I just would wrap up by talking a little bit about giving you my insight. Maybe it's unsolicited insight, but a little bit of my sort of thoughts on the proposed ordinance and what I think might be a little problematic, at least from a prosecutorial perspective, just some things that you might want to think about. So if that sounds okay to everyone, that's kind of the roadmap, if you will, and I'm happy to take any questions and of course defer some to Josh, who may be able to answer some of those questions in more detail than I can do. First of all, with racial profiling, this is the George Floyd trigger, right? It's what we've been really concerned about for many years. I mean, and I will tell you from personal experience, my brother, who was just hard, he passed away, but when he was in his life and living, he was a Hispanic man who had tattoos all over his body, had a goatee, just looked really mean and fierce, and he was pulled over twice by police because I believed he was profiled, right? And I've seen it from a personal perspective in Arizona growing up, and it wasn't pleasant. And here's my brother, who's a very law-abiding, tax-paying contributor to society, and I saw how it really sort of shook him up. Now, granted, these are things that we think about, and certainly that resonated with me. He ultimately did have some problems with the criminal justice system, but that's another story. My point is that this is something that's personal to me, and I've seen it, and I'm going to acknowledge it for what it is. What can we do to fix it, right? Well, I think there's a lot that we can do. We need to educate, we need to train, we really need to start thinking about how do we change these systemic problems with having to do with race. And so the DA's office is part of GARE. The acronym stands for, and I'm going to botch this, so I'm going to make sure I pull up my notes here, Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which is basically a national network of governments across the country that focuses on racial equity and looking at government systems. And the criminal justice system is a government system that has traditionally had racial biases at its core. So how do we go about advancing racial equity? We have to focus on the institutional and systemic racism. And we need to think about strategies and policies within, for example, the DA's office, so that we can ensure that we're eradicating it. It's not going to be overnight. It's going to be very slow. But I'm very excited about it. In fact, the GARE team is going to be doing an assessment of the DA's office starting in March. They're going to look at our office from top to bottom to figure out how we can go about being part of trying to come up with systems that are equitable in nature. Part of that, though, requires us to bring in our law enforcement partners, which I've been very, very clear about. I said, we need to make sure that they're in the mix, that they're part of the conversation, because it's important for us to have those strong communications and collaborations with law enforcement. So I think that's going to be awesome. And I think there's lots of opportunity there. And we're committed to doing that. And let me just sort of digress, but I think it's a relevant digression. I was talking about having the opportunity to spend a lot of time with law enforcement and build those relationships for the last 3 or 4 months before taking office. We've done working groups with law enforcement to talk about Brady Giglio, which I'm going to get to in just a second. Anytime we have an idea or they have an idea, we try to come up with a working group, or we're getting prosecutors, law enforcement, other even community partners to those meetings so that we can talk about these issues and try to work through them. So I'm thinking that Gare is definitely going to be, and you know, even the law enforcement chiefs have said we need to start talking about racial equity and what we can do to address what we know has to be fixed. So I'm very excited about that. Concerning the second point that I wanted to chat with you all about is the use of excessive force, which is a concern. And what happens if you have a fatality, a police shooting or law enforcement shooting? And you know, that's a very, very serious situation. So let me tell you what I know about that. I hope that doesn't happen in this community. I believe that, you know, that when it, well, I know when it does, I'll tell you, I thought, well, what happens if it happens? What happens if it happens? I've tapped into District Attorney Mark Bennett out of Sedgwick County, who has been a leader in prosecution in the state. He's very well respected, and he's considered the expert on dealing with excessive force. And he has been a wealth of information. And he serves as basically the lead prosecutor of our state for all of the DAs and county attorneys to call him. And it's very contextual. But the point is that if we have a situation that arises like that, we need to take it obviously very seriously. We need to investigate it. And of course, if necessary, bring that person to justice. So that's something I can promise you that will be done. You know, in the unfortunate situation, if it does arise, I think we've got resources and a network in place for us to address that. So in terms of coming up with those policies, what does it mean? I think, you know, we leave it up to kind of leave it in the lane of what police believe. We have these discussions, but they enforce their own policies. If it looks like it is excessive force and we have to prosecute it based on what I've just said, then of course we will do so. The third point that I wanted to chat with you about, which I think is really important as it relates to law enforcement, is the Brady-Giglio policy that we're trying to, that we will be rolling out. The question is the timing. And let me give you sort of the Brady-Giglio overview. It can be fairly complicated as a matter of constitutional law. And the more we talk about it internally, at least the lawyers, the prosecutors, and even having conversations with law enforcement, because law enforcement will say, well, what about this? And of course, you know, we think, well, wow, we're not boots to the ground because we're not doing that investigative piece of it, but what will we do with this and how does it apply? So in a nutshell, I'm just going to kind of tell you what the law is, and then I'm going to have Josh Seiden jump in and talk to you a little bit about the policy and how it's evolved and how it has included law enforcement from our community, and kind of inform you as well what the next steps are for the rollout of our policy, which, by the way, didn't exist at all here in the DA's office. So it's important that we have it. So Brady-Giglio is named after, like most Supreme Court cases, after an individual who goes up on all the way, usually up to the United States Supreme Court, has their grievance heard or their case heard, and the court issues a very important decision. So Brady's named after an individual in the case, and so is Giglio. But Brady versus Maryland is a 1963 case, and it essentially says that the prosecution must turn over any favorable evidence that's material to the defendant, either in the case itself or in sentencing. Okay, so any favorable information we find out, we have to turn it over to the defense. It is required. It is automatic. It is self-executing. It doesn't rely at all on the defendant asking for it. We just have to turn it over. The Giglio piece of it relates to, it requires that any evidence affecting the credibility of any witness, including a law enforcement witness, has to be disclosed to the defense if it could be determinative of the accused's guilt or innocence. And this language can be, you know, it's got the outgrowth of other cases. What does it mean? It's basically impeachment evidence, essentially. So in a nutshell, if we have, most of our cases require law enforcement testimony, whether it's a police officer who shows up, you know, at the call immediately, or it's a detective or an investigator. So Giglio has really been sort of focused on the law enforcement piece of what we do in terms of prosecuting cases. So we have to figure out a policy that works so that law enforcement understands that if we've got any evidence at all that could be used potentially to impeach a witness, we need to know about it. And if it's going to be admissible, which is a separate question, then we have to turn it over to the defense. Now, I've probably given you some like what does this all mean? And it's a very, very, I think conceptually, it's just tough stuff to noodle through. And that's why a policy coming up with, how does this work practically, right? So, Interim Chief Brixia says, okay, this all sounds great. I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, but how am I supposed to, how are my officers supposed to know how this works? Like, how am I supposed to make sure that we've got, in law enforcement how do we enforce that? How do we make sure that we're turning the right stuff over to you? And those are the discussions that we're having. And I think it's been a very robust discussion. And honestly, based on those discussions that we've had so far, I don't see any of those problems that are concerning to the DA's office. We had an officer who recently resigned, and that was probably a good thing for the department and for our prosecution of our cases. Now, why is it important to us that we don't have Giglio impaired law enforcement? Because if they're Giglio impaired, which is impaired means that we may have to turn over this to the defense, and then it could be used against them. It harms our prosecution of our case. So it doesn't do us any good to have officers doing the work. So Josh, did you want to add a little bit more to that, if there needs to be clarification, and then sort of maybe describe what we've done with law enforcement to try to work on this working group, and then kind of what we're doing going forward?
Certainly. Thank you, DA Valdez. I appreciate that. So just to give you folks kind of break down what Giglio material is, because it's something that we've been discussing internally with our internal Giglio committee within the DA's office. You're trying to narrow down how do you put these things into a policy. And so Giglio material can be summed up. There's really 7 main points. Are there any, when you're looking at a witness in a case, you have to evaluate, are there any specific instances of conduct going to truthfulness? Is there any opinion or reputation evidence concerning truthfulness? Do you know of any prior inconsistent statements on a material issue in a case? Is there any evidence of bias against the defendant? Is there any agency or department finding of misconduct involving truthfulness? Are there any criminal convictions? And are there any present allegations of misconduct? Now, some of those are pretty easy to iron out. I mean, if someone has criminal convictions, they have criminal convictions. You can easily iron that out. Any present allegations of misconduct? Well, what is an allegation of misconduct? Is it someone that's saying, well, I saw the officer the other day and I didn't like the way his uniform looked, and I don't think that's appropriate. Is that an allegation of misconduct? Probably not. But as you go through those 7 points, you can really sort of get into the weeds, especially when you get into things such as evidence of bias. Well, what is evidence of bias? If someone has a tattoo of a certain insignia, does that indicate that they have some sort of bias against some groups or some potential groups of defendants and whatnot? So you can really get pretty deep on that, those type of issues. And so we've been having those conversations internally as to how do you articulate these things in a clearly stated policy. And I think what's probably the most important thing that we're doing on that is we are working with the different law enforcement agencies in this jurisdiction to arrive at what is a workable policy. And we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of, a law enforcement has a good understanding of what is required of us, what our rules of ethics and the case law commands that we provide. And we also have to be aware of what are the policies and procedures of the law enforcement agencies that we're working with. And so really where we get to these things is through these types of conversations that we've been having. And it's good to get a lot of input on that. You want to get a good array, a good diversity of opinions. And we do have some very differing opinions on these things within the DA's office, and we had a very constructive meeting yesterday. And we're looking forward to speaking further with the law enforcement agencies and getting this policy put together and rolled out. We're starting from scratch with it, but it's really pretty exciting to be working with all these different things.
So,
Marie has a question, and I have a question too.
sure.
You want to take questions now, or you want to wait till the end?
I'm happy to entertain whenever you want, Sanjay.
I will defer to Marie first. Sanjay Mishra, board member. Yes.
Marie Taylor, board member. So thank you so much for this information you've been providing. I have just a question on, because Brady is pretty settled case law. So it makes me wonder what was happening beforehand, what has been in place in terms of turning over this type of material for past cases, if you can disclose all of that. But what was the sentiment before, and what has been the friction towards this new policy as you've described?
I don't think it's a friction. I just don't think there was a policy in place that the DA's office had that was formalized. And maybe, Chief Brixius can give you more from his perspective. All I can say is that Mr. Branson said, this isn't Giglio, I don't need it. Even if police were sending a question to him, about do we need to give this to you? Do we need to disclose this? My understanding, because there's nothing in writing in the office here, was that it went to the DA addressed it and then gave back his decision or whatever. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, I don't know. Maybe Chief Brixius, you can help me with this, but there was nothing in this office that is clear, that lays out the Giglio requirement.
I might be able to give a little bit of background on that as well. That's correct. There was no written policy, and kind of what in working out here for almost a decade as a defense attorney, I dealt with the DA's office a lot. And what Mr. Branson's idea of it was that, well, it's all clearly set out in Brady. It's all clearly set out in Giglio. Everybody should know what that is. But there would be times when I had, some concerns, and I would contact the district attorney's office about specific information. And one time a case came up where Mr. Branson gave me a call, and we talked about it, and we were talking about a specific instance that would fall under one of the 7 things I listed. I won't give out any identifying information right now, but it was something where Mr. Branson said to me, well, I don't think that's Brady or Giglio. Do you? I don't think it is, but I don't think it matters. And that's not the kind of answer that we want to be giving out. So that's a good starting point for us, is we know what answer we don't want to be giving out when it's requested. It can lead to some very interesting conversations.
Did you want me to speak, Suzanne? I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you and I talked a little bit about it, Chief, and I think did I overstate it? I mean, maybe I overgeneralized it. I don't know, but there's nothing in writing. That much I do know.
Yeah, Anthony Brixius, Interim Chief of Police. And so I guess I'll speak maybe to what we get from the federal justice system and what we get from the Kansas Attorney General's office. We get a pretty clear cut laid out. Do you have any of these sustained violations? And it lists different things. And then I know in the case of what Suzanne has already provided, she's provided a model policy that we can at least start to work through, and we've already done that. And I feel really good about where we're at in that. So we need that model policy. We need that policy to look through, and if there's anything that we have any question on, to be able to pick up the phone and have those discussions right away. And I know we have that just based on the working relationship that we have already.
And real quick, and then Sanjay, this area is so important to us, as Josh has indicated. We have an internal group of just the DA's office that we're noodling through some of these hypotheticals, right? And we're noodling through them so that when we do meet with our law enforcement working group, we can at least be prepared. Because I said, we need to be prepared for law enforcement to say, give us hypotheticals, or what about this, or what about that? And so we need to be able to be prepared to noodle through some of these questions. So that's happening. But we also have one of our new lawyers who was onboarded with Josh and I, John Simpson, who's a wonderful appellate lawyer. He's going to be the Giglio specialist. So he's really going to follow this stuff, not only from the kind of the region and the state, but nationally. And he's going to be the go-to guy. So, and I've let law enforcement know that if they got a Giglio question, and they need a quick answer, and certainly one that even requires more thought, to contact John, because he's our Giglio specialist in the office.
Sanjay?
May I?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sanjay Mishra, board member. So my question was, am I hearing right that the Lawrence Police Department is making efforts or is truly not Giglio tainted? That's my first question. And if that is the case, then we are still asking the question of improving community and police relationships and looking at bias policing. So that I think we are looking for a much more evasive thing, because if this not tarnished, but there's still bias happening, I see a tougher task ahead for the community police board.
Well, what I will say to that is, again, I hope that the sort of the areas that I've given you my insight, I felt like that was within my purview as district attorney, right? So what is it that I hope these are areas where we are, I think, areas of public concern, especially in current times. So I hope I've hit the high points there as they relate to our collaboration with law enforcement, because at the end of the day, when we prosecute cases, it's the state. We're one team, really. I mean, we're doing separate functions, right? But we're one team. So there's the imputation rule. In other words, what police do and law enforcement do is imputed to the state. So we have to have very strong relationships with our community, with our law enforcement partners, so that we are able to ensure that by the time we are prosecuting a case, that we have done everything that's required of the state, both by constitutional law, statutory law, ethics requirements. And that's what Josh was talking about. The other piece of it, right? The community. So how community relations and ensuring that there's public trust in what's happening. I mean, how do I play a part in that? Well, I play a part in it in terms of like the cases that we're prosecuting, right? The cases that we have confidence that we can get through the system, or by working with to try to build those relationships and involve those community stakeholders in some fashion. I really want to, I've been in this office now a month. I hope we get to the point where we can start doing more community forums, reaching out to people, answering questions, informing, just really getting out there and getting the community involved and hearing their feedback. At one point, with COVID and everything, it's made it very difficult to have these open forums and having, although maybe we can think outside the box and do them virtually. At one point I offered both to all the law enforcement chiefs. I said, hey, maybe we all just do a forum where we let the community just ask questions, and it's, whether it's and state their concerns. So we're open to that. Anything that I think where we can get people to talk openly and air their concerns and we listen. I mean, I think that's a big part of communication, right? We have to hear what's out there and what the concerns are. I know some people don't feel safe here. They have reasons why they don't feel safe here. Some people have felt like they, for different reasons, there may be a lack of trust, but you know what? That's what's happening right now in the national landscape. There's not a lot of trust in government at all. So law enforcement's a piece of it. I mean, it's a piece of what I do every day, and I'm trying to do what I can to listen and go from there and try to build that trust. So I don't really have an answer right now for you, except that I think going sort of roundabout is to really at some point be able to involve the community more and hear what they have to say. Of course, first step here is listening to what you all have to say and what your ideas are, because you're on this board, and I'm happy to hear from you and talk with you at any time. Josh, did you have anything to add on that you thought would be helpful?
Well, thank you. Yes, this is Josh Seiden with the District Attorney's Office. Just to kind of dovetail on what the District Attorney was talking about. One thing that we're really trying to do in the office is, again, it's difficult in COVID times, but trying to enhance our presence in the community, because the more familiar that the members of the community are with our office and the people that work there, the more that they're going to be willing to trust us to protect public safety and to provide the alternative programming that we provide and to perform our essential functions. And so we're working on more community outreach. Today, I responded to some emails that we'd gotten from some concerned citizens in the area. And so it's something where we want people to know that when there are questions or there are concerns, please contact us. We want to hear from you. The model rules of professional conduct don't always allow us to discuss the things that people may want to discuss with us as they pertain to specific cases and whatnot. But we certainly do want to hear from the public. And we've got a number of people in our office that are engaged in various civic organizations and things like that. And so we're really trying to increase our presence in the community.
Thank you, Josh. It's nice having you here, by the way. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I'm feeling this is kind of a closure loop, perhaps. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. District Attorney Valdez, you mentioned also that you had some specific points from your perspective about the ordinance. So
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I here's a couple of things. And I'm grateful to board member Littleton for sharing with me I guess the ordinances as they've evolved over time, and then kind of your proposal for going forward. And so I had a few things that I thought would, and she kind of broke it down for me in an email, which I thought was really helpful. So thank you for that. So in terms of overhauling the ordinance that's currently in effect, one would be to broaden your scope so that you are able to review all kinds of complaints. And so, my sense in that, again, I'm staying in my lane. But what I would say is that may be burdensome to what, one of the things that has been, it's hard to be a prosecutor right now. It's hard to be a police officer. It's just the climate is such that it's not a popular job to have right now. I know we're running short on attorneys, and I believe law enforcement as a whole, it's hard to recruit good people, and we want to recruit good people. So I think what's going to happen is it may be that you may have to put resources into something like that that could be used for more effectively for community safety. So there's that. I mean, just in terms of the resources, the investigation piece of it is in terms of the powers to investigate any complaints that you may determine need to be have further investigation. I think that might be problematic, especially if the conduct rises to a level where it could lead to a investigation that may be that could result in prosecution of a case. That would interfere with our ability to do our job if we needed to do it, which of course, as I've indicated to you, if it gets into the space of excessive force, We'll take those situations very seriously, and we will prosecute those cases if we need to. So if we have this separate investigation, if you will, happening, that could really could potentially cause problems with our ability to do our job. And then lastly is, I think some of the language is fairly vague and fairly broad in terms of like, what is a complaint? Is it rude behavior? Is it, I don't know. It just seems very vague. And what could happen in my mind is that, the chief wants to know if his officer was rude, and then he's got a chain of command. As I understand their procedures where, if you've got someone who's out on patrol and is rude, you bring them in, you say, you know what, we got this complaint, were you rude? Just like, stop it. Like, what were you doing? So there's ways that I think that you can handle some of I call them trivial. They're not trivial to the people who are experiencing them, but certainly there's ways that you can address them. And I think ultimately, when it comes down to keeping good police, keeping good employees, just in general, is it fixable, right? Is this something that we can fix? Is it something that we need to do training on? And I'm just talking in generalities here. So I think that if you don't allow the law enforcement agencies with their own policies to address some of these issues, it could chill the ability of law enforcement to take care of some of the stuff that could be taken care of just by bringing someone in and having a conversation with them or giving them training. I also worry about, I don't know if many of you, maybe you have, I've been reading a lot about unionization, the strong unions of police and fire, mostly police, in particular, the NYPD in New York has a very strong union. And if you end up with a situation where you have a bad apple, it is very difficult to get rid of that bad apple. And you worry that it's just going to, create that unnecessarily. So again, I'm not in my lane here. I'm just letting you know that I think that this community, what we have right now in terms of leadership with the various law enforcement agencies is very strong. We're all on the same page. We all acknowledge and recognize that, it's a challenge every day, but everyone's working good faith. And I think too, that sometimes community members just want to call up Chief Brixius and say, hey, your dude was rude. And that's the end of it, right? They don't want anyone else to be investigating. And it creates, like, I certainly wouldn't. I want them to know about it, fix it. I just think that gives the board a lot of unnecessary, it just may create more problems. I call it a parade of horribles, consequences and things that you just may not want to go down that road when, you know what, the chain of command can take care of it. So I'm not saying, and I'm not dismissing some of the racial profiling stuff. I'm not going, that's important stuff. But how do we all recognize that that's important? And I think that's where the chief, the consultant that's coming in to work with the police, Gare's coming in for us, which is essentially a consultant of sorts. I think the timing of this is just perfect because we're going to have Gare in our office talking about, racial equity and how do we go about fixing our systems. And because we have working groups and good collaboration with law enforcement, we're going to be bringing them in. And I think at the same time, you're having the consultant who's looking at their operations. If we can collaborate on sort of what we're doing together, the criminal justice institution, if you will, I think the timing's perfect for that. So I would really, really encourage allowing those consultants to come in and see what's going on, because that's what we're doing in terms of Gare doing that piece.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So District Attorney Valdez, your comments really resonated with me because I think it kind of, we've had those kind of discussions internally, like where to set up boundaries, how broadly should we define complaints, pros and cons on both ends of that. So it really, I think we struggled with some of the same questions that you're raising too, and trying to figure out where to draw the line. And so we are still in the process of getting comments back on this draft. And from my perspective, I wanted to keep the focus on racial and bias-based policing, specifically for the fact that I didn't want to dilute our efforts. But at the same time, I kind of lost that vote because we don't know yet what other kinds of complaints have been coming in. So I think this ordinance will probably have some growing pains, and we'll figure out whether we actually need to rein back the definitions that we've put out there for complaints. We'll find out as we go. But I think the board was wanting to err on the side of caution to figure out, what's the lay of the land in terms of the complaints that we haven't had our eyes on. And then we might have to circle back and kind of sharpen those definitions as we go. It's a kind of a work in progress.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Marie. We'll go with Jenny and then Stephanie.
Board Member Jenny Robinson, thank you for joining us tonight, both DA Valdez and Josh. I also wanted to clarify that we did discuss broadening to all complaints being reviewed because we didn't want to put the burden of identifying a bias-based policing encounter on the person, the complainant, or the person making the complaint. So because that's, I believe, the current, how something qualifies as bias-based policing is it has to be identified by the complainant as such. And so we wanted to broaden that so we could see if we could identify patterns, maybe identify bias-based policing that wasn't identified as such to begin with.
Very good.
Stephanie.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. I'm going to piggyback kind of to both Jenny and Marie. Very good points. We definitely wanted to broaden it. I do think that as we kind of move forward, we'll certainly have to prioritize what we are doing. I mean, we're obviously not going to lose sight of the bias-based being so important, but definitely we'll have to prioritize. We just don't know what that volume will look like, but I also kind of wanted to add something that the interim chief has shared and Brandon has shared, that they have a new dashboard coming fairly soon, in a couple of months, that may really assist us, that has built-in factors in it that will be really, really important to be able to track data. That's going to be important to tell us, early warning signs and such. So there's a lot of things coming together, as you, Josh and Suzanne has spoken of as well. We've got all this new partnership going on, lots of good things taking place. So we just don't know how that's all going to kind of wash out, but we just kind of have to keep moving forward and just make sure we have hand in the ordinance in place. But I just want to make a note, Josh and Suzanne, I really appreciate you joining us and providing all that insight. And we just know we have great partnership going on. So thank you.
Yeah, and I will, we'll be kind of exiting here, but I wanted to make sure that you all know I'm available to you all at any time. Josh and I, and even Deputy Dave Melton, District Attorney Dave Melton as well. Josh has been great, just really at the really understanding kind of what we're trying to do here in the mission, and so that's really sort of his wheelhouse, the policies and all of that. So we're happy to hear from you too. I mean, if you think that we need to work on something or consider something, I mean, this goes both ways. So I hope that you feel like you can reach out to us and bring us back and ask us tough questions and have hard conversations. Sanjay and Marie both know that I'm good with having tough conversations. So I welcome the feedback from you all as well. Josh, is there anything you wanted to add before we say goodbye?
I just want to say, thank you all for having us tonight. And it's like the district attorney said, if you have any questions or if you have any concerns, we're easy to get a hold of. Please, we want to hear from you. We want to know how we're doing, and look forward to talking with you folks again in the future.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much for coming this evening, and a month in. Really appreciate it, and I hope we can have you back for sure. I think what we're talking about toward the end, I'm sorry, this is Chair Salvini, toward the end of our, or the discussion is a good segue to our agenda item, our next agenda item, item 2, because this is really where we are. So this group has done a lot of very, very good work getting us to where we are, and we just continue to learn more, and as was discussed, trying to figure out what a good efficacy level is in terms of looking at complaints. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, very good. Thank you all. I think this is Chair Salvini. We're ready to move to agenda item number 2, which is review the police department complaint process, and that would be a document that was attached going over the personnel complaint policy process. And I'm wondering who would like to lead us through this. Chief, would you like to do that? I was hopeful it would be you. So Chief Brexis, thank you.
Interim Chief Anthony Brixis, and I am a little disappointed that Suzanne and Josh left. Would have loved for them to stick around. And while we have talked policy, maybe not on this level, but I understand that they're probably busy in their night. And even though they're not here, I would kind of just reference what we've seen from that office already. We've had several major cases where they've been here and been actively involved. And so it's been very impressive so far. And like District Attorney Valdez said, we've had lots of conversations about officer conduct and Brady Giglio and the policies and things like that. So I'm going to share a screen with you because I'm going to simplify that 9-page policy for once, right? So bear with me here, and because my sharing skills may not be as good as I want them to be. And how much of my screen can you see? Is it just the presentation or my entire background?
Yes, it looks perfect.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to kind of walk through this because I think if you don't have a solid dealing with it all the time, then it becomes kind of confusing of what's what. And I think that's very understandable. You know, I know we've talked, and I say we, it wasn't me, but I know clear back in 18 in September, we did an OPA interview with the board. And then in 19, we did some hypothetical investigations. And here this year, I know there's at least discussions when we did the number of complaints received, those kind of morphed into what's a low level and what's a high level. And so I had talked to Tanya and Stephanie and really tried to get at what we're needing to explain better. And as I started to put it into the form of writing, I feel like we kind of got there, or I hope we'll get there. You're going to tell me at the end, right? So I want to talk a little bit about personal complaints. And to start with anything, it's really about the process, right? And for the purposes of what you see here, it's the start to finish, but the green too is if you were asking my opinion, where the board can have the most impact, it is in the green, right? It's, do we have access, do our citizens have access to the various types of different complaints? And are there systems of accountability in place? And if not, what should those be? So we're going to take you through each one, but for the short version, it's the access to what the allegation is, the level and investigator that the police department is going to assign, the investigation itself of what that may go. And I would just encourage you, or I would remind you that it's really different for every little thing. But I'm trying to give you some generalities. The recommendation or finding that we have, and then what are the systems of accountability that are in place. So I want to talk about access a little bit. And, when Stephanie and Tanya and I talked, we even talked about ways that maybe we could improve this that's more direct to the board. And I think they were going to be looking for some feedback, maybe from you all, so we could get to that to the city IT. But I would say this is the front of our department website. It's the very first page, and it has both the citizens complaint and the citizens review board. Now, website is fine if you know what you're looking for. We do accept complaints in any other fashion. That could be someone calling into dispatch. That could be someone stopping an officer. It doesn't even have to be a supervisor. An officer or supervisor, we accept them by telephone. We accept them by writing. We accept them anonymously. Now, all the factors of how they may come in may make it more difficult to investigate. For example, anonymously may make it more difficult to investigate if you can't follow up on something. So once you click into the complaint process, it gives a pretty good detail about who to contact or different outlets that you can contact, and what is going to take place in the complaint process. And it also gets in specifically to racial or other bias-based policing, and gives you some other alternatives of contacting the state, which is ultimately now, it used to be the AG's office, and that's still the report's made to, but it's now investigated by CPOST, which is our certifying agency, is where it used to be investigated by the Kansas Attorney General's office. And then the findings, and we'll kind of get to that, but one of the things that we do in all our open investigations is have a letter of disposition to the complainant. But most times, and I say most because we can't always get a hold of everyone, most times we're going to reach out and personally talk to them about what that finding was before we send that letter, just to have that kind of that personal touch. And then I just wanted to point out that within the Citizens Review Board page, there's a lot of information and access to your meetings, to the ordinances, to how to get a hold of you. And so I think those things are great. And I know that Stephanie and Tanya are going to provide me with some ways that maybe we can make that better and complete that loop in the access. So what's an allegation? And I know sometimes we've been using the word complaint. And so an allegation is an unproven accusation that an employee violated department policy, rules, or procedures or law. And we're going to get into a little bit different of why that is not necessarily a complaint and why a complaint is different. But you see the definitions here, and I've snippeted the portions of the policy that you have. Not every bit of the policy, because I didn't want to do that to you. And then we're going to kind of discuss those things in more detail after we get past the snippet. So the first thing that we have, and we're going to get into each one of these, so I apologize as I'm skipping through, but I wanted you to kind of understand on the front end who's investigating what. And we have the inquiry, and the inquiry at its basic level is it's an allegation that maybe isn't a policy violation, even if true. Okay, so it's an allegation of maybe unhappiness. I'm unhappy that you wrote me a ticket instead of writing me a warning ticket, right? Even if the allegation were proven true, it wouldn't be a policy violation. I'm unhappy that you chose not to take my neighbor to jail, even though I felt like that they should have, but it's within law and within policy. We'll talk about minor violations, which is some of the complaints that Suzanne was talking about, rudeness, speeding, things that wouldn't arise to a major investigation. We'll talk about OPA investigations, which are those major violations of policy that could lead up to suspension, termination. And then we'll also talk about some of the criminal ones that the DA was talking about earlier, and how we handle each of these. So all of these are handled a little different. And then within that, some of them can be handled slightly different just based on the evidence that you have and how we investigate it. We're not going to get as much into the investigation, but more about the process today. So in the inquiry, and I kind of explained this, but we'll do the full read version. It's complaints that are deemed to constitute an inquiry may be handled by any supervisor that can appropriately address the concern. In most circumstances, this is the employee's immediate supervisor. So I built my little boxes here, and you'll see these kind of throughout. Inquiries are typically handled by the supervisor taking the call. And I say that because when the allegation is made, the supervisor typically realizes that that is not a policy violation. it's just a complaint of unhappiness, if that makes sense, or a complaint of or an allegation that they're not satisfied with the outcome. And so most times what the supervisor will do will try to explain the policy or explain that the law enforcement officer may have the ability to choose whether to issue a citation, not issue a citation, arrest someone, not arrest someone, things of that nature. And so these actually come up quite often. They're not even always necessarily on a specific officer. We get complaints that you all were using the range out in the county and it was too loud today, right? Not a policy violation, not a violation of law. Now I put what an inquiry may include, and it would maybe include that if it was unclear. Most of the times the inquiries are pretty clear. There is cases where they're not, especially when it's that we may use inquiry to start, and we may turn it to an open investigation if we can get more information. And where that would typically be used is a broad open statement that is maybe against a person, but not with a specific incident. Like, I think person X does this in general, but there's no specific instance that they could follow, right? So we would have to do some investigation to get in that. Or I heard all police officers are doing Y, right? That may come in the form of inquiries. So how we track that? In the past, this is probably one of the poorest areas that we track, okay? Because the supervisor handles it, they go on about their business, they're pretty happy with their day, right? There's no longer this unhappiness by the person in most cases, but I think even still, it's probably something that we should be tracking, and it's definitely something that we are going to be tracking and are tracking as of today. We'll kind of get into that as well. The open inquiry file is what we talked about, where maybe we have this broad allegation that we're trying to narrow it down. More recently, we had body cameras since 2019, and if the supervisor knew they were receiving some sort of complaint, they would just tag it in their body camera under complaint. Often supervisors would record phone calls. This is also where the miscellaneous phone calls go to. If someone calls, they have a general inquiry, I'm just not happy with the way this turned out. The problem was there was really nowhere to track that. So it might be on the supervisor's desktop. If the OPA supervisor received the call, they always put it into a specific file. So as of last week, our world is changing, and Stephanie talked a little bit about that. So we implemented Blue Team and IA Pro, and I will give you the Reader's Digest version towards the end of this of what that means. But just so you know that 2 weeks ago it wasn't being tracked, now it is being tracked, if that makes sense. So we have the minor complaint, and we do specifically call out some things there: the attitude, the rudeness, poor customer service, maybe an incomplete report. These are minor in nature, so long as they're not repetitive events, right? And so once they become repetitive events, for us, they become a more serious policy violation. And so this is an informal supervisor sitting down and talking with the employee about what happened. Could they potentially review video, read reports, things of that nature? It is very possible, but it doesn't mean that it's always necessary. It's very based on what the complaint actually is from the person. Maybe they reviewed the body camera right away and they say, yeah, this is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, or hey, I just absolutely need to counsel. Maybe you weren't rude, but you were a little bit too direct, and we should work on your customer service and sales skills a little bit, right? So I brought my boxes back out, and you're going to continue to see them, and I'm trying to make it as easy as possible because I know the policy itself is kind of confusing. So this is not always handled by the supervisor who just takes it, but it's typically handled by the supervisor within the same chain of command. And what I mean by that is we have supervisors that are directly assigned to officers. That's a little more recent that we've done that. And there's a myriad of reasons to do that. Complaints is one of them. So they're seeing the same kind of thing over and over and over again, if there is such. Or it's handled with their chain of command. There's 2 other sergeants on that particular shift. Sometimes it might be a sergeant that's on an overlapping shift, meaning they still work with them. But it could also be the lieutenant or the captain of that shift. So within their same chain of command, so we're seeing repetitive events. This is one too, if someone was to call the Office of Professional Accountability, well, the Office of Professional Accountability is going to listen to them. they're going to forward this on to their direct supervisor. So the minor complaints can, the easiest one for us is body camera, and we'll get into a little bit that later as well. The body camera, in-car camera, because it's the best witness to the event, right? They're not perfect. You don't always see things from the right point of view. You don't always hear things, but it's a really, really good start. And you'll see later in the presentation that it's really changed our, not only our complaint process, but kind of what is coming in and what is not coming in. So this is tracked. It's not tracked in a catchable format by the department at whole. It was tracked in the employee's Spillman administrative file. So if Tanya calls and complains that I'm rude, and the supervisor looks at it and makes whatever determination and speaks with me, maybe they put counseling in my Spillman administrative file. So every time a supervisor looks at that employee's file, they're going to see that. So if another one comes in, they're going to be able to start to address those problems. Our problem with it was we can't tell you how many complaints of rudeness we have, because it's akin to a stone tablet and chisel, right? We have to go through and hand count everybody and everything on different times. The other way it's tracked is like we talked about, the supervisor recording it under the body camera complaint from the person who's making the allegation. And then I put letter of reprimand in here because it's not directly stated in the policy that's the middle outcome, right? We have the low level complaint. We have the complaint that may end up in a suspension or termination. And the letter of reprimand can kind of fall in between. So let's say this is my third allegation of rudeness, and the supervisor believes that these are in fact true. They may at that time issue a letter of reprimand, and it could go through OPA and it could not. I would tell you this is that we have changed it to where anytime you get a letter of reprimand, we are putting an OPA number to it. So even if the supervisor handles it, we are going to send it to the Office of Professional Accountability as somewhere that it kind of keeps. And so that may at times make our numbers go up because those things weren't necessarily done before, but I think it's a good tracking system to understand that we have a repetitive event, and that maybe that's a problem. Maybe if it's a problem with 2 or 3 people, that we're able to see that a little quicker. Where are we tracking it now? We're tracking it in Blue Team, right? And we'll go over that again at the end. So the OPA investigation, these are the investigations that when you're asking for reports that you more commonly see. So I will give you, DA Branson kind of gave you, or excuse me, I apologize, DA Valdez gave you her 2 cents on where things somewhat impede on criminal investigations. So for me and for the city of Lawrence, based on the type of government that we are and based on some of the Garrity rules, which allow me to compel an officer, meaning if they don't tell me what happens, I can let them go. I can discipline them, including up to termination, right? So Garrity is a really important piece. And when you get outside entities either investigating or making decisions that are outside that city chain of command, you could have some issues with that. And I know that that's what any police officer group would argue, that you can no longer compel me, that now I'm going to ask for an attorney every time you're trying to talk to me about one of these things. And so for us, the ability to compel is really a big deal, because it allows us to get information on investigations, to include criminal investigations aside from the criminal investigation. Meaning a person can tell the criminal investigator they don't want to talk to them, they still have to talk to us in a separate form and fashion, if that makes sense. So OPA investigations, typically handled by the OPA lieutenant or captain. It was formerly a sergeant, but as we went through our restructuring process, a consultant recommended that that be a lieutenant based on the level of decisions that they're making. This can be assigned to another supervisor, probably is going to be a lieutenant or a captain through the OPA office. Well, why would we do that? Maybe the OPA person is on vacation, right? Maybe they have a serious couple of investigations that they're investigating, or maybe the initial supervisor has so much knowledge about it that they're the better person. A good example would be that event that may rise to a letter, right? It may be their lieutenant who investigates it, but ultimately it's going to get an OPA number, an Office of Professional Accountability number. So the OPA investigations is the, I guess, the full Monty, for lack of a better term. They're going to review not only the statement from the complainant, the witness statement, the body camera, the in-car camera, things of that nature, so long as they're relevant, if that makes sense. So if they're not directly relevant, if a witness was at the event 5 minutes before, but it's not relevant to the event that happened, they're not going to probably go down that route. So they're going to try and do all relevant information. We do have a myriad of systems that that we are able to gain information from. It's not just the body camera, the in-car camera. We have things like GPS in the car, so we can tell when a person was where according to their car, and then data captured within their mobile data computers, things of that nature. So those things are helpful in an OPA investigation to either prove or disprove an allegation. So the past tracking, probably the one that we were best at. It did go in the Spillman admin file. Also, a letter would go into the employee's personnel file. It would also be under the body camera complaint, but not solely, if that makes sense. It would be under the several of them. And then, as I mentioned to you before, the letter of reprimand goes into an employee file or with an open number. And of course, we are now tracking that in Blue Team. So criminal law violations, these may be the easiest as far as investigation for us. So the policy is this. That it belongs to our criminal investigations division unless the chief of police determines otherwise. So I would tell you that for my philosophy, and it's the first thing that I do is if I think I have a criminal allegation is I contact the DA, or if it's for some reason in another jurisdiction, then we would completely not be handling it at all. But let's say it's a criminal allegation here in Lawrence, Douglas County, Kansas. I'm going to maybe take a preliminary look at the event, contact the district attorney's office, and get guidance. And generally, and I know that Suzanne and I even talked about this recently, generally, if a person is the victim, right, we have an officer involved shooting, we have an allegation of domestic violence, we have an allegation where a person is the victim of the crime, we are going to want to have another law enforcement agency do that, okay? So we've called the Johnson County shoot team on several of our officer-involved shootings. We've called the KBI. We've had Shawnee County investigate things for us. We've had Douglas County investigate things for us. And these are generally things where a person is the victim or the potential victim of the alleged crime. Where I will go forward and have the Lawrence Police Department look at it with the approval or with the discussion, rather, of the district attorney is if the government is the victim. I accessed a system or misused a system that I wasn't supposed to, and it amounts to a crime, right? And so the reason that we would do that is because it's much more expeditious. While our partnering agencies are fantastic, they also have a caseload as well, right? And if we have something that we can see on face value needs attention right away, and the victim is not a person, we want to be able to investigate that as quickly as possible and get that to the DA's office so we can have a determination made by the DA. So most OPA investigations, typically we let the criminal investigation go first, okay? There are some circumstances that we won't. If, for instance, we get an allegation, and let's just use body camera for instance, and on a internal review by body camera, I can immediately tell that there's an issue, that maybe it's a use of force, right? And I can tell that there's an issue that it very well could be outside of our policy, and it might be a significant event. We may run the investigation concurrently then. Especially if it's something that is detrimental to the agency, to the city, to the trust of the community, if we weren't doing that quickly, if that makes sense. But typically, we're going to let the criminal investigation run. Post-investigation, the difference between us and a criminal investigation or a criminal investigator is that ability to compel. And so if there's questions that maybe an individual didn't want to answer, or maybe questions that are more pertinent to our administrative investigation as opposed to the criminal investigation, then we'll follow up with those questions. But in general, we take the criminal investigation and kind of work from there, right? So in the criminal investigation, they're allowed to hand that to us. Things that we compel people on, we are not allowed to hand that to them. However, we do cooperate with agency records requests, if that makes sense. If Shawnee County is investigating for us and they say, we would like to have your body camera, we don't have them do a search warrant and go through the hoops that you might go through with the business. We would just ask for official letter of assistance, and we would provide those things. So there's two separate decisions here. There's a charging decision, and then there's an OPA decision, right? And they don't necessarily go together all the time. And the DA is charging it based off what they believe that they can convict in a criminal court of law. And we are looking at it based on what is our policy, did it violate it, and what's the significance of that, and potentially what is the follow-up on that, whether that's discipline, termination, things of that nature. So the past tracking of this, obviously a criminal case gets a criminal number. It's tracked within the law enforcement system that takes it, and also the DA's office. And then there's also an OPA tracking file. And so as stated earlier, we're moving to Blue Team and IA Pro, but the criminal case will still exist. All right, so we have a myriad of findings. These are specific to OPA complaints. So if you call and say Anthony Brixis was speeding, you're probably not going to get that information, right? This is how we handled that. This is the discipline that the employee received. You'll never really get the discipline. But the minor violations or the minor complaints, we generally take those. And then if the supervisor warrants it based on maybe there's unclear information or something, they will contact the person who's made the complaint again, but not always. Many times people are just like, I want you to know this. I don't need any follow-up. I just wanted you to let you know this happened. And then the minor investigation occurs. So our sustained is the greater weight of the evidence establishes that the complaint is valid and the employee violated department policy of law. I won't read all these to you, but I'll point out some ones that are maybe, one is new, relatively new within the last 2 years. And then just some things that we've seen come up before. We added commended because we've had some allegations that have come in that an officer did something of a certain nature, and the evidence, the body camera and things of that show that they actually did something more that should be commended for how they handle situation. Maybe it was that it was exceptional in how they try to talk a person down or something like that. We've added a policy deficiency, and I'll give you a good example of that is we have pursuit policies, right? And in the pursuit policy, it says you have to do very specific things, and it's like 7 or 8 things. It's really difficult to do when you're under stress and you're driving and you're trying to get out locations. And so the pursuit policy said shall at one point, when really in probably 100% of the pursuits that I've ever listened to or been a part of, no one's been able to get all 8 things across because they're so focused on trying to not do harm. So in one of our pursuits, the only violation was they didn't get out like the direction of travel, or something like that, even though they get on the street. So we determined that was a policy deficiency more than it was an act of misconduct by the person. Close by exception is something that was added 2 years ago. I haven't determined if I'm a fan of this one or not. So withdrew the complaint. Typically in the past, when people have withdrawn a complaint, it either got an empty OPA case number, meaning, and we just put that the person withdrew their complaint, or let's say I want to make a complaint, and this actually happened quite a bit as we first got body cameras, and we invited someone in to watch their own body camera. They would immediately withdraw it before they fill out. So they saw, maybe they didn't remember what they thought they remembered. They might have had a substance in them, or sometimes we'll get complaints that parents will make for a child and the parents weren't there. And once they view a camera, they realize that maybe they determined they didn't want to make that complaint. So that's how we typically handled those in the past. And as long as they haven't filled out a complaint form, those have been able to be withdrawn, right? The other portion is failed to cooperate in the investigation. This is one of the reasons I don't like this. I think we still may be able to get to a sustained or not sustained. Typically, if you're going to say that someone's not going to cooperate with the investigation, it's going to lead to a termination anyway, or a voluntary resignation. And so I don't know if it's necessary here. And then this is probably the key one, is the officer separated from employment prior to the completion of the investigation. So the first thing I would want the board to know is, regardless of if they do that, regardless of if this is the determination that we use, we still forward our information to CPOST, the certifying agency, so that they can make a determination on the officer's certification for the rest of the state of Kansas. So it's not a situation where we would want to be passing on someone who wasn't meeting the standards of the department, or violating law, or violating major policies that may have them in a giglio type situation, and not pass that on. So I want the board to understand that we still pass that on. Where I have hesitation with it is sometimes people withdraw or resign as we meet with them and we let them know what the evidence is, and we tell them maybe that it's our intention to do final review, and it's possible that we're going to separate, but the investigation's already done, right? So everything else is there. So that's why I have a little bit of hesitation with that one that was added a couple of years ago. And it's something that I want to look at a little further, and certainly maybe get some guidance even from CPOST and our city attorney's office, who's excellent at looking at some of these things. So we talked about other places where, in my opinion, the board is really, really, really valuable, right? And it's the systems of accountability. And so I think this is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the systems of accountability, that I've heard people say the police might be investigating the police, right? That may be true, and largely for the reasons that I talked to you about before, the ability to compel, the ability to make an investigation go quicker. But there are extensive levels of review in everything we do. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those internal and then external. And when I say internal, I am really truly talking about entities within the city of Lawrence, okay? Not just the police department. We don't operate in a silo. We operate with several people here, and we'll talk about them each individually. So body cameras. Body cameras were implemented fully towards the end of 2019. Captain McKinley, who's in the room, was a major, major part of that. So if you see him, thank him, because he worked tremendously hard on that. And they've really changed the way that we operate as far as knowing information, because in the past, much of it was he said, she said, witness said, and so forth, right? We did have, so those things have really made it to where we can hear what's going on. We can hear conversations, we can hear tones, we can hear, even if we can't see maybe a use of force, we can hear a drop the knife or get back or things like that, that really allow our people who investigate those kind of things, and I'll talk about use of force in a little bit, to have a better understanding of what the perception was. So we have in-car cameras, which is just a backup. The good thing about the in-car camera is it's just catching, it's one more angle, right? As many cameras as we can have. It's parked, it's static, but it may be facing a different direction than what the officer was facing. The body camera, so mine is down here. It's below, just above my belly button. Excuse me. Some agencies wear them on their head, so they swivel with them. Some agencies wear them all over the place. But the body camera is limited in this. My body camera is pointed at you right now, but I'm looking the other direction, if that makes sense. So I'm seeing one thing and the body camera is only seeing other things, but it is a great starting place. So body camera, in-car camera, 3 levels of findings. What do I mean by that? So let's take the most significant case, and that's an OPA case. And so in an OPA case, within the department alone, you have the open investigator, who's probably going to be the lieutenant, whether it's the OPA lieutenant, or in some certain cases, it may be a shift lieutenant. That OPA lieutenant is then going to have to forward their findings, like, this is my case, and they put out a very lengthy written case. Here's my attachment of videos. Here's my attachment of the reports that were submitted. And they have to submit it to their captain. And the captain independently reviews it and comes up with their own finding. So the findings do not have to match. The captain can say, I agree or I disagree with your findings. Then it goes to myself, and then I have that same ability. I can review it and say, I either agree or disagree with the findings. Now for the department, I am the final determination, but I am not the final termination. Some additional resources we have before I get to the final determination is human resources. When we're having a major investigation, when we're having an employee issue that's consistent, we're consulting with human resources. And Lori Carnahan, she has a great deal of experience and a great deal of knowledge in helping guide us as far as what resources are available to us, what the procedural steps are, because you got to remember that while some bad things do happen, they don't happen enough that you're dealing with them all the time. So you really want to get some guidance in that. And they, of course, know city policy even better, because we operate largely, our department policy covers most things, but city policy sometimes covers some additional things that we're not used to operating on in the context of an investigation. We have the employee grievance process, and what that is, if the employee doesn't find satisfaction with what has occurred, is they can take that through a board made up of a department head and several other city people, where they will hear the investigation, and from a city point of view, then they can make a recommendation to the city manager's office of what they think should be the final disposition on a case-by-case basis. We have municipal court. And why I say municipal court is they see our citations, they hear our testimony, they see our reports, and if they catch something that they feel is off, they do a really good job of notifying us, whether that is Scott Miller, who's the judge, or Beth Hafoka, or one of the prosecutors. I have a great deal of confidence in the municipal court office, and I have a great deal of confidence that if there was anything that they believed was it a nature that needed to be brought to the attention of the department, that they would do that. The city attorney's office, Maria Garcia and Tony and Randy, what a great resource. They're always there. They always pick up the phone, and they give us good legal guidance about whether it's the employment side of things, whether it's how to handle it, or what the violation may be. We consult them quite often, and anything that's sticky, so to speak, anything that's questionable and not clear cut, we're going to have Maria or Tony review. And there's just a great deal of experience there, and I trust them a great deal to tell us and to tell me if they think I'm wrong, if that makes sense. So I certainly want that, and they're certainly willing to do that if they would disagree with something that I've made a determination on, or somebody else has made a determination on. And then, of course, what we talked about, the ultimate authority here, and that's the city manager, the city manager's office. And that's the system of government that we have, is that the city manager is the ultimate decider of an employee action, right? And so whether it comes through me, whether it comes through the grievance board, or somehow goes straight to the top, that's the final decision maker. We have some good layers. Brandon, who's in the office there, Brandon is my direct boss, and I know that he would tell you that if there's a situation that I have that I think needs his attention, or at least his knowledge of, that we notify Brandon of that. In addition to that, Craig, and the city manager obviously has a great deal of experience, and he's going to be the final decision maker on a lot of these things, but we want to keep him in the loop. And I feel like if there's ever an issue, it's a 3, if not 4-way conversation, often between myself, the city manager, Brandon, Tony, or Maria, and then at times Lori as well. And then finally, we do an end of year reporting to the city manager's office. And one of those, we used to sit down in a room and do that, but I think this year it's going to be over Zoom, in which we report the OPA cases, and many of them they're already going to have knowledge of. But if they don't, they have the ability to ask questions and to make sure that we've come to a good conclusion. So that's the internal. And so that's why I always am bewildered a little bit when people say we can't have accountability internally. And there's a little bit of a citizens review board from the beginning when you talk about the attorney, the city manager, the assistant city manager, the human resource director. Externally, we have the DA's office, of course, in criminal matters. I also consult with DA Valdez in the cases of like something that may come to Brady, I've made a new word, Brady or Giglio, certainly. And if we have a question about that, we'll open up those employee records. First, our legal would look at them, and then we would talk to her about what is reportable for her office. We have the state court and civil court, and they have checks and balances in that as well. If they're seeing something in that maybe they want, maybe they don't know if it's a violation or not, but there's a news story about it. That's one of the things that I was unaware of. So we learned that sometimes if there's a news story, if something's been out there, whether the finding was positive or negative, that may be something that we need to disclose. That's been new to me. So there are some things that we're learning on all the time. I'm thankful to learn part of that process, because what we definitely want to do is be right and have the trust of our citizens and even our governing body. We have the Kansas Attorney General's office, and why I say that is because if someone was to feel that we were still wrong, they still have the opportunity to report things to the Kansas Attorney General's office. In addition to that, they can report things to CPOST. CPOST will then gather all our investigation and then do more investigation if they need to on their own. We have a citizens media view request. And what that means is, Tanya, if you're the subject of one of our recordings, then by law, if you want to come see a recording, we have to show it to you within a certain amount of time. And so why that's a good checks and balances is if you know that you feel something happened, you can go check that and see if you're correct, and you can use state courts for civil violations. You can use federal courts. You could use that information and not even have to go to court. You could say, to go to the city manager's office or the city attorney's office, say, I believe there's an error here, and this is what I've seen on the video that I was the subject of. And then of course, we have the CPRB, and I think that's been specific to some of the racial profiling cases, and there's some other discussions that you all are obviously partaking in, but that's certainly a level of review, certainly a level of access that I think is important to have. Someone can come to you, but certainly also if there is that case that they feel like that they want you to review it. And I do say want, because we have a lot of citizens that will give us information, but they don't want to be part of a greater investigation, if that makes sense. And they've even told us that, hey, if this is something I have to testify on, and generally that would be something that's not, criminal or something, then I don't want to be a part of that. But I'm willing to give you the information so you can do your own investigation. So having a citizen, especially if they're the subject of a complaint, wanting their information reviewed, I think that's a very important thing, that they would be able to have some outlet of doing that. And we certainly have a lot of outlets here. All right, I promised, I put it up on the tee. So Blue Team, we're talking two different things. When I say Blue Team and IA Pro, they are the same software system, meaning we bought them together. Blue Team is the input, IA Pro is the tracking, if that makes sense. So today I receive a allegation of what happened, all right? And regardless of what that allegation is, positive, negative, whether it's a inquiry, OPA, or minor complaint, I as the supervisor can put that in, with all the details. I can attach the body camera footage to it. I can attach the email that you sent or the recorded phone call that we had, or the reports that also go with that. And I make a nice, neat little package. And then depending on where it kind of fits, if it's that minor complaint, the supervisor who collected it, it goes to the lieutenant or captain. It has to go to one. We ask them to CC both. So I'm going to tell you, we have 3 sets of eyes. The reality of it is we're automatically going to have 4 sets of eyes. So I've taken this complaint, this issue, I've put it into Blue Team. I am not allowed to submit it. It has to go to my supervisor, meaning the supervisor's supervisor, to be able to submit it. Once it's submitted, now where Office of Professional Accountability never touched things before, like in some of the inquiries, some of the phone calls, some of the minor complaints. It then goes to the Office of Professional Accountability, where they look at it and determine if they are, where it falls within the policy and what type of investigation is needed. And if they're unsure, they would go to their captain. And if they're unsure, they would go to me. And if I'm unsure, I'm going to go to Tony or Maria or Lori Carnahan. So this is the entry. This looks really basic. It actually gets quite complex. You can attach people, witnesses, videos from both your in-car videos that maybe the person took, pictures. Pretty interesting concept. I put this on there because it does use of force as well. And so we have a use of force report. And so not just complaints, but use of force. As a supervisor, eventually it's the person. The person actually fills out their use of force report. The supervisor approves it. But today, because we haven't given training to the employees yet, the supervisor would put in a use of force report. So maybe they used a taser, right? I'm sorry, Tanya, do you have a question?
No, do you mind if we ask questions as you go? Because I
don't mind. I'm almost done though, if you want.
Okay, all right, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So the use of force report would go in. Again, it's going to have to hit then the employee supervisor. The sergeants cannot submit to IA Pro, so they have to submit it to a lieutenant or captain. And then in the case of use of force, it's a little bit different. So if it's a complaint, it would go to OPA originally. If it's just a reportable use of force, which we have reportable uses of force, even if the person's not complaining, it goes to a use of force board. What is that? It's a captain, lieutenant, a sergeant, several officers who are expertise in use of force in various disciplines, right? And it may be firearms, it may be taser. They're the experts that I call on to look at use of force, because even with my 18 years of experience and training hours and all that, we still use experts within this discipline because it's such a high expertise matter. So they put that in, it goes through the lieutenant. You talked about early warning dashboards. Here's your early warning dashboard. This is what the day-to-day supervisor sees. So I'm going to have, let's say I have 7 people on my team. They're going to see their 7 people. And if they've had a couple employee action logs, if they've had a couple chases, we'll give a time frame of when that is, then that would give you one of these little red boxes. And that would be an indicator for the supervisor to trigger a review of that, right? And so you've had too many chases, let's look at them. They may be completely justifiable. They may not, right? But we have to look at the behavior so we can get patterns of behavior. This is not ours, sorry. It's just from the website. So this hasn't been built into ours yet. The last part of this is reporting. And so this is the times where you ask someone, or our board, of how many inquiries have we had in the last year, right? Mm-hmm. How many minor complaints about rudeness have we had, and what is the race and ethnicity? This program is able to pull out all of those things on the back end. So submit into Blue Team. IA Pro then is what we use to provide external reporting. There's just some more reporting. It comes in different forms and fashions. What Blue Team is used for now, it's used for an employee log, which is a positive performance, the inquiries, the complaints, the OPA, and use of force. We just rolled this out. It's brand new to everybody. There's policies that we have to change. So we're going to get the policies fixed on these. And then eventually we're going to also put vehicle accidents, firearm discharge, vehicle pursuits, training requests, lost damaged property, utilization of our canines, and then some award stuff in there because it just has a great tracking system. But so if someone has discharged their firearm so many times in so many years, that would trigger an automatic review. I'll take questions on that because we're going to talk OPA for just a minute. But if you had questions, Tanya, I don't want you to lose your train of thought.
Oh, I wrote them down. Thank you.
Okay. So I wanted to give you a quick snippet of OPA cases. They're down tremendously this year. I would say a lot of that has to do with 2 things. Body cameras you saw we got at the end of 2019, you see the cases drop, and then you also see 2020, COVID is a big part of that. We have significantly less contacts. And so The less we contact people, sometimes the less they're mad at us. So those are the two major things. The body camera is pretty significant because as you get to the initial stages of, I think something happened, we will invite somebody in to watch their own body camera footage. And often people decide that, okay, I just misremembered something, if that makes sense. So people seeing their own body camera footage is great. Now, where that previously may have been the end of the story, now we're still going to capture that in Blue Team, if that makes sense. So the citizen chose to just not make the complaint at all because of that. I would tell you before 2010, which is when we had WatchGuard in-car cameras, we were typically up into the 20s of complaints. So yes, it does affect the officer's behavior, but it also at times affects a citizen's desire to make a complaint once they've watched the interaction unfold, if that makes sense. So I do want to tell you lastly, and then I'll just open you up completely to questions, is, and I apologize because it did not get to you all, but if you go on our website right now, under the performance reports, you will find our 2020 use of force reporting, and that details each of the 20 reportable incidents of use of force. So if someone got struck in the head, if someone had to go to the hospital, if someone was OC'd, if someone received a taser, there's all these things that are reportable use of force. Those are on there, they're detailed. A couple things that I'm happy to report is that of our 60,000 plus calls, we have 20 incidents of uses of force. And when 60,000 calls, it's not just one-to-one. I might show up at calls and have 10 people there or 2 people there. It's certainly not a one-to-one, but the 1 to 60,000 ratio or 20 to 60,000 ratio is a good one to start because those are the numbers that we know we can capture. And then that also, we made over 1,700 arrests. And so you're looking at a use of force of about 1%. And if you do it to our contacts, if it's the one-to-one, it's like 0.003 or 0.0003%. So I think officers are doing a good job using their tools of communication and de-escalation. And there are times where an officer has to use force. And with that, I need a drink of water, but I'm also open to any questions.
Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chief Brixius, thank you so much for that presentation. And I read the document before our meeting, and I found that to be very helpful. And your presentation clarified some things. So I really want to say how much I appreciate you're taking the time to do that for us. I have some pretty basic questions about the complaint process that if they're in that document, I missed them, but I'd like to know how you receive most of the complaints. Do they come in by phone for the most part, or do people fill out forms and send them in, or is there an email access? How do most of your complaints come in?
Well, I'll be able to give you a percentage answer here in a year, but if I was to guess,
I'd take a guess right now.
I would say 80 to 90% come in either on scene, right? They ask for a supervisor right then, or they're calling dispatch and requesting a supervisor to call them.
Okay. Do you mind if I go ahead with my other questions?
Please.
Okay, well, it's still Jane Gibson, board member. I hope I don't have to do that every time. Do the complaints, the ones that are on scene obviously are not anonymous in that moment, but are most people asking to be kept anonymous in the complaint process, or are people willing to use their names in the process?
So complaints on scene, certainly not. They're usually about them in the moment right then, right?
Uh-huh.
Complaints where it may be an incident that was off duty, or they maybe know someone personally. Sometimes they will ask to be kept out of a bigger process.
Can you give us an example of why someone might want to keep their name out of a process?
Yeah, so it could be because they also have bad behavior in the process. And we've experienced that before as far as the things that maybe they were done even jointly, if that makes sense. And so They then don't want to be the subject of something criminal or something like that, which ultimately is not up to us anyway. So it actually happens more than you think. It's kind of odd that people are like, I just want you to know about this. Now you go deal with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I'm asking those questions about that part of the process because in the original ordinance, the one that we're still under, and the one that we proposed as well, we are invited to, I guess, produce an alternative path for complaints, something that might be, I don't know, more user-friendly or something. So I wanted to know more about your process there.
Yes.
Can you tell us how complainants learn about the outcome of their complaints?
So for the OPA complaints, they receive a letter, but typically we also telephone them. So we don't always get a hold of them, but we try to telephone them before the letter. So if they have any questions.
But there is a letter?
There is a letter. For
And
OPA
in that
complaints.
letter or in the telephone call, if the complaint doesn't go their way, if it's not sustained, where do they learn about the option to appeal that complaint?
So for the racial or other bias-based policing, we can direct them to the Community Police Review Board and the website of how they might do that, right?
Is that what you do?
It's what every open investigator should be doing. So I don't want to say every time it's done, but it should be every single time. So as far as I know, it is, but usually it's done at the beginning of the process. So typically, if I'm the open investigator and you say, I have this racial or other bias-based policing, we will give you the options that are there. You can have us investigate it. And this is how this goes. And if you have a disagreement with it, you can take it to the Community Police Review Board, right? Or you can have, through the Kansas Attorney General's office, have C-Post investigate it. And so we've had a couple people take the option of C-Post investigating it. At that point, sometimes C-Post will then just ask us for our information. Sometimes we've also been in the middle of the investigation and someone has changed their mind. They go, now I want C-Post. And so we've contacted C-Post and had them conclude the investigation.
You mentioned only the racial and bias-based policing complaints. Are you saying that those are the only ones that are appealed or can be appealed?
Those are the only ones appealed. I guess you could appeal to the city manager, right? The city manager is the ultimate authority in that. So if someone disagreed with the final finding, they could take that to the city manager's office. Typically, when we're talking about OPA complaints, though, if someone disagreed, they're probably going to take that to court, to civil court. So that checks and balance is kind of already there. So the things that are OPA, the things that are significant, and a person's involved, you're usually talking about use of force, civil rights violations, something of that nature. So part of the process is the court process. And Jane, I would tell you as we look at a future process, I think the way our processes lay out, the first appeal is to the chief, and that doesn't make sense to me because the chief just made the decision. And so I feel like it should kind of go lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, and then appeal can come to the chief and an appeal can come to the city manager. We just don't have that layer in place right now. But it never made sense to me to have the person who just made the decision be the point of appeal.
And just to make sure that I'm understanding you, the appeals that are in the original ordinance that establish the CPRB, those are only for racial and bias-based policing.
That's correct.
Okay. And that information that they can appeal it is not in the letter pro forma?
I would have to pull it up, but I don't recall that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Other questions? Sanjay? This is Tanya Salvini, by the way.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. So Chief Brooks, thank you again for doing this for us.
Yeah.
My question is simple, and I think DA Valdez also alluded to it, is how do you define a complaint? When does a conversation become a complaint?
So if you remember on the first slide, we had the allegation, right? And an allegation can be a complaint or an inquiry, but a complaint is something that, if true, would be a violation of department policy, city policy, or law. So if what the person is saying is true, then it would be a violation. So you used improper force, that'd be a major one, that'd be an OPA one, right? If you said that I used improper force, and before we're trying to prove if it's true or not, but just take the allegation alone. If I did indeed use an improper use of force, that is a complaint. Because if it was true that I used improper force, then that would be a violation of law, policy, etc. Even the rudeness is a complaint because by policy, we're not supposed to be rude, right? It's a minor complaint though. It's just how the investigation handles is differently. So if true, if I am rude or if I didn't do a good report, that would be a violation of department policy. So that is a complaint. I came to you, I issued you a citation and you said, I don't like the fact that Anthony issued me a citation. I wish he would have issued me a warning. Even if that's true, it's not going to be a violation of policy or law. Does that make sense? That's an inquiry.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, I'm hearing is it's classified as a complaint or an allegation at the end of the investigation.
No, so it's an allegation first, okay? And then there's three ways it can go, but two of them say complaint on them. Allegation is I'm unsatisfied with what has occurred, whatever that is, right? And I think that it's a bad thing. So, but I just may not be familiar with state law. I may not be familiar with city ordinance. I may not be familiar with Department of Procedure, but I'm telling you, this should have happened a different way. But department policy, let's say, or state law says this is lawful. That is an inquiry, right? It's just a misunderstanding of the policy, the procedure, the state law. If what your allegation is saying is true, if it's true, regardless of what the finding is, and it would be a violation of department policy, city policy, state or federal law, that is a complaint.
So that's what I'm saying, is that till that determination is made, it stays a statement.
It stays an allegation. Yes.
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 And is this determination on the basis of fact?
Yes.
Or the
It's on the basis of
officer
whether-
looking at it includes their interpretation or their opinion on it?
It's
So,
it's on the
for
basis-
example, rudeness, simple thing, rudeness.
Mhm.
Rudeness. This officer was rude to me. How would you determine that was a complaint or not a complaint?
That is automatically a complaint because if it was true, then it would be a violation of department policy.
And can I follow up? The other question is where you talked about dispositions of allegations, and there were 7, 8 categories.
Yes.
How do the bins fill out at the end of the year? So how many go into each category?
It is very much different each year. And you can actually, if you go to the same page that we were talking about where the use of force is, there are reports going back to, I think, 2015, and it gives you what the...
Get down on those.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. Chief, I have a quick question.
Sure.
I know you're getting started in this system, and I'm just wondering, I guess my question is twofold, and Jane got some of my questions, so good job, Jane. Thank you. Are you applying for accreditation? Or are you already accredited by the body that designates best practices in law enforcement?
So the accreditation piece is through CALEA, and part of our consultant's task was to get us ready to join CALEA. Once you join CALEA, it's about a 2 to 3 year process, but they're kind of making sure that we are up and up. So, but I would tell you this is we have Lexipol as our policy maker, and Lexipol gives us when we're in, it tells us when we're in CALEA at accreditation already. And so we know that a great deal, most, especially all of our major policies are already within that accreditation range.
Sure. Okay. And so where I'm going from that then is, will there be, or is there currently an external review that, let's just say, let's say you have 30 reports of the use of force, and now you've got it in the system, correct? You do an internal review, right?
Yes.
Now, is there an external group of experts that come in and randomly sample, a certain percentage of those that might be in a year, to review and double check and make sure that they concur with the internal review that you all do for quality control or quality purposes?
No, that's a good question. So for the purposes of CALEA, what they do is they proof, like a math proof, that you say your policy is this, then you have to show us. Meaning, so I say we have a use of force that we follow use of force board, and they make a determination based on this other policy of when you can use force. And then we have to show them a redacted report just by names to say, and they have to cross-check to go, yes, you have a good policy. Yes, you're following it. Yes, you're following your use of force. Yes, you're following the reporting, and you've made good decisions. Does that make sense? So it's a proof process, but not on like all 30. So the use of force is internally generated by us.
Yeah.
If it's externally generated, meaning you say that we use force, I am going to have that board look at it, but independent of the OPA investigator. It will still go to OPA. It's not the one people making the decision. On a use of force that goes to OPA, I can't imagine it's not going to go to Tony Wheeler as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Chief, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Sorry, Board Member Taylor, I might jump in just with a quick follow-up question. Can you talk at all? Are you familiar enough yet with the CALEA process? Can you talk about CALEA's review of your internal investigation OPA process?
I'm not familiar enough to talk about that specific. I know that they have certain, they're going to do everything from how we process evidence and how we package it. But the major ones, such as use of force, how you do your Office of Professional Accountability, sometimes called IA, are going to be the most scrutinized. I would also tell you that the federal government came out with a pretty heavy scrutiny, or I say it's a heavy scrutiny here a few months ago, as far as your use of force policies and what they have to be to determine if you can get federal funding. And not only did we meet that, we met it. I submitted the paperwork on the second day after it was available because our policies were already up to the national standards and exceeded the national standards. So we were able to turn that around very quickly. But I don't know enough about that specific. I just know those are some of the more highly scrutinized policies.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah. Marie.
Yes, Board Member Marie Taylor. So your response, Chief, fits with my more difficult question. I have a couple other questions, but my difficult one is, so how does the department go about determining whether there should be changes to their policies, say, based on sort of new findings about use of excessive force, or if there's in the media there's talk about like 8 can't wait. So how do you go about incorporating and reflecting on how to change policies which may not be brought to your attention by an incident or a complaint? So it's not complaint driven, but it's still out there. So what's the mechanism for you all to kind of work through those kinds of changes in standards besides the ones that come through more police associations?
So I have what I would call 2 of the greatest resources ever. One is the human resource, and Maria Garcia, she's very excellent at research and finding when things are coming through. The other one is Lexapol, which has thousands and thousands of agencies. So within days after the George Floyd incident, we were getting new recommendations on our policies, whether it was chokeholds or things like that. So that comes out very quickly through them because it's their job to do the 3,000 or 4,000, I think it's 3,000 or 4,000 agencies many of them also major agencies, and give you updates. Now we have the choice to accept the policy or not, right? So typically what we do on a use of force policy, and I can use this as an example, is we get new use of force recommendations. We then forward it to Maria or Tony as a double check. Is this the policy that the city of Lawrence wants us to follow? And typically it's been yes, because it's a recommendation of how to, reduce liability, reduce use of force encounters, things of that. So that updates daily. It updates all the time. And we have 2 folks, one in our professional standards unit over training, looking over that and then we have a Captain Casey Cooper, who gets all of those updates as they come in. And he immediately brings them to the people's attention that need it, whether it's something that needs Maria's attention because it's a legal matter, or it could be a legal matter, or if it's something that wouldn't necessarily rise to something that's going to cause civil litigation or affect somebody's civil liberties or something like that. He would bring it to me.
Thank you. I have 2 more. They're very short. Marie Taylor, board member. How long do you keep and retain the record of a citizen media review request? So like the camera, things like that. What's the usual time frame for holding on to that before someone may request to review it?
Yes, Captain McKinley, can you help me out there, please, on the retention?
Yeah, so it's based on the classification of the event. So if it's connected with a criminal investigation, even if it's a misdemeanor violation, that's something we're going to be keeping that body camera recording for 5 years. So we're going to have it for a very long period of time. If it's something that was classified as a citizen contact or something like that, maybe if it's not even associated with a call, it falls to a lesser classification, usually about a 90-day purge period. So as long as somebody reaches out to us within that period of time and says, I'd like to review this record, I can mark it so that it does not purge, and then it will essentially stay there indefinitely. As it pertains to right for people to come in and review a record, once they make that, if they're the subject of the record, if they're the attorney, if they're their parent, we have to comply with that request to review the record within 20 days of receiving it. Did that answer all your questions?
Marie Taylor, board member, yes, thank you. And my next question though is, the system that we talked about is about compliance, and that's what we've been focusing on, but does the same system work for commendations or compliments that, will it accommodate that kind of information, relaying that kind of information to the department?
It does. And then the cool thing about it to me is it's entered the same way. So if today you called me and were complimenting someone, I would enter it. Or if today you were complaining on someone, I would enter it. It would go through the levels of review and it would be determined of what that actually falls into. So all those things are then reviewed by multiple sets of supervisor. The system really is taking us out of an electronic dark age for tracking this. And so it's unfortunate that we didn't have it sooner. Myself and Captain Squire, Lieutenant Under, they ran this project, those 2 did, but myself, Captain Squire, Captain Cooper, we happened to be in another agency, and they were talking about, we just run it through Blue Team. We were like, what are you talking about? We've never heard of it. And they told us all that it did, and we've been on a quest to get it ever since. And so that was probably 6 months ago, and we just got the lights turned on this last week.
Very good. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I just wanted to circle back around to Board Member Taylor's first question, or maybe not the first question, sorry, but the question about policy change and the review of policies. I'm not quite sure Anthony gave you the full picture, because I think specifically you were asking about policies that are not driven by the law enforcement industry. Anthony gave you the perspective from the law enforcement industry primarily, but I just wanted to point out that police is just one department of many departments of the city organization, the city government organization, and all of those departments are overseen from a management basis by the city manager's office, and our executive staff works very closely together. You know, Anthony's mentioned several times Human Resources, City Attorney's Office, and so we are all monitoring our own professional associations, and there's a lot of collaboration that goes on across departments, and a lot of content and challenges and ideas that are driven out of the city manager's office, especially. Our city manager, Craig Owens, has a tremendous amount of experience working, especially in the St. Louis area, experience working in community and police relations, and so he is constantly challenging Chief Brixius, his command staff, myself, and it surprises me if a day goes by that he doesn't send an email about some best practice or some model example. And so I just wanted to point out a lot of that happens, whether it's driven from the city attorney's office and our professional associations, or it's driven from some other department and their industry associations. And then finally, you know, part of the whole public process, the whole public policy process, one example I might point out is public cameras, the use of public-facing camera technology. Some of our city commissioners have asked for a policy to you know, establish the parameters and the requirements and expectations for the management of public camera systems, and you know, address privacy issues, data retention, data destruction issues, those sorts of things. And so, you know, that comes from a city commissioner, or from the city commission, and then we're responsive to that. And so there are a number of different ways, both internal to the industry of law enforcement as well as external, that we're constantly looking at our policies and trying to make sure that we're at least staying up to the curve, if not trying to anticipate what the next thing is going to be, so that we might be able to get out in front of it.
Very good. Thank you, Brandon. This is Chair Salvini. Board Member Littleton.
Thanks. This board member, Stephanie Littleton. Chief, I just wanted to clarify if I followed you right. So on this new, it's called the Blue Team iPro system, IA Pro. Anyway, when the complaint comes in the door, so I think from past history, from what we've been explained, it kind of went to various hands. But if I follow what you said, it's going to kind of go through a certain funnel.
Yeah, I think that's correct, especially when you talk about a minor complaint, right? So in the past, a minor complaint was probably handled by the supervisor and never funneled, if that makes sense. And in this case, the minor complaint will still be handled by the supervisor, but it has to funnel through their supervision, the supervisor's supervision, and then through the Office of Professional Accountability. So it's a longer process. There's multiple eyes looking at it. There's at least 3 levels of department review before it's made a final determination on.
Very well. Thank you.
Any other questions? This is Chair Salvini. Interim Chief Brixius, thank you so much. Really appreciate everything you've done this evening. It's been for us and informing us. It's been very good and very informative. So again, we appreciate you and appreciate the presentation this evening.
Well, thank you for having me. And if you'd like, I can submit the presentation to Brandon to be a part of the notes. That way you can refer back to that way you can use my boxes again, because I was really happy.
You like your boxes.
Simpler.
No, really, thank you. I was just going to ask if you could, if we could get a copy of that. That'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you all for inviting me.
Madam Chair, would you like to ask for a public comment before we move on to the next item?
Yes, please. I'll turn it over to Stephanie. Board Member Littleton.
Sure. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, do we have anyone from the public that wishes to speak? Okay, Alex, you have the floor.
Hello, I'm Alex Kerr. I want to publicly thank this board, police chief, and the city staff for reviewing the police department complaint process. This complaint process has been a lot to think about. It's a lot of information. And I just want to say, I want to thank the police giving us the presentation. And I'm very happy that this board's reviewing this. So with that, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay, Tanya.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're on to the third item then on the agenda. And that would be the update on the LawrenceListens survey regarding draft ordinance. And who would like to present on that this evening? Sanjay? Board member?
I was pointing to Jane.
Oh, she's over here in my, okay. Sanjay and Jane, you have the floor.
Board member Jane Gibson. Well, the committee sent a draft that went to city staff, Porter and Brandon and Professor Muhammad, or Dr. Muhammad, I guess is he Professor Muhammad? I'm not sure. And they sent it back to us with some suggestions, and we made some revisions and sent it back to them. And as I understand it, and Brandon, catch me up if I've got this wrong, it's now in their hands, and they have uploaded it to LawrenceListens in a way that only those who have the link that Brandon sent out can use it. And we would like for everybody on the board to look at it and send comments and suggestions, any things you see that's a problem, back to Brandon and Porter, and they will put that together and run it through the committee so that we can make the last adjustments. And then we would like to do that before, well, I think Brandon said he would like to upload the survey to LawrenceListens by tomorrow close of business. So this is a very fast turnaround. Maybe some of you have already done that and you're ready to send your comments back to Brandon. That's all I have. Stephanie, Sanjay, Brandon.
That's good. Thank you, Jane.
Yes, yeah, I think that really covers it.
And it is ready to go live. We just want to make sure that the rest of the board members have a chance to, get a level of comfort with it. And I've already received one confirmation that it looks good from at least one of the board members. So let us know, and we can work that up really quickly. If we see that there's some glaring errors, something like that to that effect, then we'll communicate with the subcommittee and work through that and maybe pump the brakes on a Friday release and shoot for next week. But we'd really like to get it out there so you can start getting some feedback. And then we had anticipated being up for a minimum of at least 3 weeks. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Board member Robinson.
Board member Robinson. Brandon, will you email us on the board when that's released for the public?
I will do my very best to remember to do that. Yes, but you all should have the link to the private draft survey in your inbox, in your email inbox now. And pending any major issues, we're going to go live by end of day tomorrow. So. If I don't get from you, I have a very busy day tomorrow. So if I don't get back to you before then, please forgive me. And just make sure to kind of check on the website around 5 tomorrow and see if it's live.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Go ahead, Jenny.
I just have a follow-up. For the people who volunteered to contact some community members, did you get the document shared with you? Yes. Is anyone that volunteered didn't get it?
Board member Marie Taylor, I didn't. It's hard to want to respond because we're trying not to do the open meetings by mistake rule.
Yes, I know. I was like, I sent it out. Hope for the best.
Right.
So, board member Marie Taylor. So yes, thank you, Jenny, for doing that. And my question was going to be if we should work with Porter to receive hard copies so that we can follow through and do our deliveries and coordinating with our contacts. So we would just all individually talk to Porter. And then my other comment was, if you want to know when the survey comes out, sign up for LawrenceListens.
Thank you for plugging
Good
it.
one. Good one, Marie. Good one. Okay.
Yes, we do have that on our to-do list, that once the survey is finalized and published online, then we'll print hard copies.
Okay.
And we had planned on doing a stack in Spanish and a stack in English. So.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Littleton, and then Sanjay, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
This board. Jenny, do I need to receive whatever you sent out since I've been making some contacts, or am I good to go? I didn't know if there's something I need. Or...
Board Member Robinson, no, it's just the list of organizations and groups that we went over at our last meeting. So if you're going rogue and doing your own thing.
Okay.
If you want, oh, I believe the intro script was shared, was attached to the last agenda, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's there.
Okay, very good.
Okay, very good. Any other, this is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor. So I like how the survey has spaces for open-ended questions throughout, or space for comments, I should say, throughout. I think that's just, I just love that feature. It'll be a lot of work for us to try to figure out how to organize all that material that we get, but that'd be a nice problem to have. When I saw that, I thought, well, we're probably going to generate some good feedback that would also inform what Citygate's doing. So we can probably plan on being able to share that same information to them, because I'm sure there'll be overlap. And I actually like that feature, because we shouldn't try to pigeonhole people into the comments just specifically about this issue when they may have other things that they would like to communicate. And so I imagine there'll be some flexibility in how we can also share that information with the Citygate team.
Yes.
Yeah. This is Chair Salvini. Absolutely. Brandon, is this information being shared with Citygate?
Yes, Assistant City Manager Brendan McGuire. Yes, that has been our plan, and we discussed that with the consultant, that even though this is a process running parallel to their process, we think that this is all good data for them to have access to.
Okay. Very good. Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. Brandon, can you tell us how the data will be delivered to us? How will we have access to the data?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I believe you will be able to get into, if we can't get you into the back end of the LawrenceListens system, because it is a third-party software system that we have user licenses for. If we can't get you into the back end, then we will publish reports, and we've done that several times for other advisory boards who have used this system, or city commissioners who have used the system. And there's actually some fairly decent reporting functionality with this system that we really like. So we'll work on getting you either a good report, or even maybe with the subcommittee at least getting some access so we can show you the back end raw data.
Raw data.
Thank you.
Very good. I see some hands now. This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Robinson, are we looking, especially as far as paper surveys go, to get those back before our next meeting? Is that kind of what we discussed?
This is Chair Salvini. I believe so. If anyone remembers something differently, I thought we were trying to get them done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Board Member Robinson, follow-up question. How do we then translate those paper surveys into the database that will be collecting the other surveys from?
Sure. Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Littleton.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. So segue, Jenny, to your question. I had that I was going to propose to the board to consider is we wanted to take a couple of the citizens' letters that were written that we have historical, and put those into the survey. So at the same time, we're going to need to put all those into the survey. So we have to, discuss how we want to do all those.
Okay, does that answer, this is Chair Salvini, does that answer Board Member Robinson? And then I recognize Board Member Gibson, sorry, go ahead.
Board Member Robinson, Brandon, in the past with surveys done through LawrenceListens, have there ever been paper surveys done simultaneously?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, off the top of my head, I do not know that. I know that we do a lot of, when we're in non-COVID times, a lot of tabling and in-person meetings where we go through the same questionnaire. But I do not know off the top of my head. What I would suggest is that board members who end up getting completed paper copies of their surveys, I would suggest submitting that to one of the members of the survey subcommittee so that the subcommittee and city staff can maybe get together in a couple weeks and work out the best way to capture those responses.
Board Member Robinson, okay, does that sound good to the subcommittee? And it's Jane?
Mhm.
And who else is on that subcommittee?
Sanjay.
Stephanie and Sanjay.
Okay.
Board Member Board Member
Go ahead,
Gibson.
Jenny. I'm sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
So that's good for the subcommittee, and then I could just email one of you and drop off the surveys at your house or whatever works for you.
Board Member Gibson.
This is Jane Gibson, board member. I guess that's a part of my question. I didn't know how you envisioned, I guess, that people would return their hard copy surveys. Are you going to have a box on site that people can drop them in, or are you expecting them to mail them back, or what was your plan there? I mean, I'm mostly curious about that. There's more than one way to do that. But I also wondered if, since the digital survey is for 3 weeks, we probably should set the same deadline for the hard copy ones.
Board Member Robinson, I was just planning for the places I'm going to do hard copies with, just coordinating with each, because there might be different needs at each. There might be a contact person that's open to collecting completed surveys, or just using my connections to kind of determine what would work best for each place. But then I would pick them up personally from each location.
Thank you.
Other questions? This is Chair Salvini calling on Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. So when the survey goes live, we're going to use our list to mail to somebody or to propagate or to highlight this LawrenceListens survey site. It's my impression. So what I would suggest is we take the opening paragraph, the intro paragraph, and use that as the introduction to ask people or request people to participate in the survey. Because and that way we will be consistent across everybody who's sending it out.
This is Chair Salvini. Any response to that?
Board Member Jane Gibson, it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Anything else on the survey then? Board Member Robinson.
I just wanted to clarify, we did write an invitation paragraph to kind of invite people to take the survey as well. Then the wording's a little bit different from the first paragraph of the survey. Would it be all right with the board if we kind of used our judgment about which version to use based on who we're reaching out to?
I'm good with that. because you understand your audience better, individuals understand their audience better, so they can determine which is best.
Board Member Jane Gibson, I think generally that's probably fine, but because the one that we wrote, we took from the one that you produced, Jenny. So they should be about the same, or at least they should have the same intent, even some of the same language. But I think it'd be a good idea to look at the two side by side and make sure that we're not indicating different things to different audiences.
This is Chair Salvini. Any other comments or responses to addressing the survey? Board Member Robinson?
Board Member Robinson, should we pull that up really quickly and just take a quick look at that while we're all together, or no? No, Jane saying no. I'll have a look at it, okay?
Okay.
It is very similar, Jenny. It's very similar.
It is.
Madam Chair.
Okay, very good then. This is Chair Salvini. Yes, Brandon.
Yes, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I just wanted to point out.
While this isn't directly related to the survey, the Citygate Associates consultant team, we have really filled out their calendar for community listening opportunities and public engagement. And the board members received an invitation today for 2 general public listening sessions. And so just for the record, for anybody who's watching, the first session is February 27th in the early afternoon, beginning at 1:00 p.m. That is a Saturday, and we checked the KU basketball schedule, and they don't play till 7 that night. So we'll celebrate a win later in the evening. And the second opportunity is March 4th, and that is a Thursday, and it begins at 6 p.m. We wanted to provide a weekend afternoon opportunity as well as a weekday evening opportunity to try to catch people who are on different schedules for whatever reason. And so those are 2 that are set in stone, and we'll have our full complement of consultants with us. They'll be running the meeting, but the Police Review Board, the Human Relations Commission, and the City Commissioners are all invited to participate in a listening role in those meetings. We wanted to provide you the opportunity, especially being responsive to the City Commission's request that the 2 boards, HRC and Community Police Review Board, engage in broad community listening. So we hope that that'll be a good format for you to do that, and we look forward to your attendance, if at all possible, at one or both of those meetings.
Thank you. This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Brandon. You took one of my wrap-up things, so I only have one more. So very good. Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. Brandon, will you be sending us an invitation with a link?
Yes, well, actually the consultant will. They'll be running the Zoom meeting, so that'll be forthcoming. And then there's also a website that we'll start getting some publicity through the city website and city social media. And that's run by the consultant, and they'll be providing those public meeting links there as well. So that'll give you an easy point to refer people to as you're encouraging them to participate in those meetings as well. You can send them to that website, and they can register easily enough through that website once it's updated with the links.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge and thank the staff for sending us the information most recently on the open meetings law. So I read that with great interest, of course. So I wanted to thank you all for keeping us informed on that. I saw Board Member Taylor.
Oh, Board Member Murray Taylor. Everyone stay off Facebook.
Yeah.
Really, that's what I took from that. I didn't be told stay off Facebook. Really, it's. But I wanted to point out, Brandon, if you could give out the website address for the consultant at
Citygate.
For City.
Or if you could send it to us, that would be great.
No, Board Member Murray Taylor, just for our viewers.
Yes. Well,
thank you. Sorry.
Give me just one moment. Sorry. have to create the longest passwords here. Yes, it is citygateassociates.com/
Safe and secure Lawrence. And there is a hyphen between the word safe and secure Lawrence. So we will be promoting
Is there
it.
one between secure?
Yes.
Is there one between secure
Yes.
and Lawrence too?
Yes.
Okay.
So we will be promoting this through social media and website channels. But yes, please feel free to direct people there. The consultant is managing it and we'll be updating it. And two things, just for the record, for anybody who's watching at home, there is a email address and a phone number that goes to a voicemail box, a local phone number. We wanted to address especially concerns about technology access or barriers to using email and internet. So feel free to give out that phone number because that's a great opportunity for somebody who may not feel comfortable getting online, sending an email, participating in a Zoom meeting to still provide direct input to the consultant. So, and that is a voicemail box that's monitored by the consultant. City staff does not have access to it, so it's a good way to do that in a confidential way.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you very much, Brandon. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I see our next meeting is March 11th. Is there a motion anywhere out there?
Board Member Jane Gibson, I move we adjourn until March 11th.
Second.
Second by Sanjay. Okay, roll call. Board Member Gibson, yay or nay?
Yay.
Graybill,
Board Member Graybill, yay.
Littleton,
Littleton, yes.
Board Member Mishra.
Member Mishra, yes.
Yes. Robinson,
Board Member Robinson, yes.
Taylor,
Board Member Murray Taylor, yes.
I'm frozen, maybe? Board Member Taylor, yay or nay?
Board Member Marie Taylor, I've got you here now. You're waiting. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Board Member Salvini, yay. We've unanimously passed this motion by Board Member Gibson, and the 7 votes have it. Thank you all so much for this evening, and we will see you March 11th.
Thank you all.
Good night. Thanks, everybody,
Night.
for meeting.